And hi, everyone. Welcome to Healthy Chatter today. We have with us today Jason Harriman, and he is a wildlife biologist with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. And he's going to talk to us today about living in bear country. And one quick announcement I'm going to make today is that we are not going to have Healthy Chatter next week, next Friday, June 5th, but we will be back to Healthy Chatter on the 12th, and that will be our first back in person at the Alaska Tribal Cache building in the Seldovia Conference Center. So we're excited about that, and we will see you guys all there. And that is going to be Catherine Shake and Kyra Wagner from Homer Soil and Water Conservation District talking to us about invasive species. So there's that plug for our upcoming Healthy Chatter. Jason, you're always welcome to join us for that. And I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Jason.
Okay, thank you, Shannon. So as Shannon said, today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about living in bear country, as you all do over there in Seldovia, and we do here in Homer as well. I always like to start with, see if I can get my screen to change. Oh, there we go. With a little bit of biology for species. You folks know that the American black bear is what you have most commonly over there in Seldovia. Not to say you don't have the occasional brown bear that wanders through. But the adult black bear, ranges in size from 130 to 660 pounds for males and 90 to 200 pounds for females. Now, in Alaska, we're on the smaller end of that scale just because they're competing with those brown bears for resources. So they typically are on the smaller size scale. Reproduction for black bears, they reach reproductive age at about 3, especially around here. They're mating right now as we speak. So mating season's June through August. Cubs are born in January and February, and a litter size is 1 to 5. What we commonly see in our area is 2 to 3 cubs for our black bears. And as we go along, if folks have questions, feel free to raise your hand, I guess, electronically, and we'll try to answer them. Diet for our black bears, this time of year, they're concentrating a lot on those grasses and emergent sedges, especially at the beach line and kind of as the snow melts back. As our berries come out, they'll switch to that. And then, of course, salmon. They do go after the occasional moose calf. We don't have deer fawns over here, but over in Prince William Sound, that's one of their favorite foods. Of course, in the fall time, Devil's Club berries is a good staple for them. So since we live in bear country, we need to be bear aware at all times, and kind of a lot of times you'll see sign of a bear, but you won't actually see a bear. But that way you'll know that they've been on your property in the area. Some of the basic things to look for, of course, is scat, like our picture here up on the screen. Tracks, hair left on bushes, especially that Devil's Club. You usually find nice clumps of it on there. Ripped logs, places they've chewed on things, maybe the corner of your cabin, hopefully not. Clipped vegetation this time of year, they're eating some of that emergent vegetation. So even like those willows, they're first starting to come out, they'll clip those off and eat them. Clawed trees, I'm sure you guys see lots of those when you're hiking around over there. And then carcass stashes. And usually you'll see ravens and eagles, jays, gathered around a carcass stash, and that's your best indication that there's one in the area. You should probably avoid that area. As you guys might know, bears are typically crepuscular, which means they're most active kind of in the sunrise and sunset time frame. Wanted to cover a little bit of bear behavior. Sometimes they're cute and cuddly like this guy sitting at your picnic table waiting for lunch. But these here are just some photos of curious bears to give you an idea of what they look like. When a bear is standing up, with its ears erect and forward. At that point, it's really trying to figure out what you are. It's curious as to what's making that noise, what's that movement. You can see the black bear that's standing there. He's got his head turned, his ears are forward. He's trying to figure out what's making the noise there over in the bushes. So most often when you see a curious bear, their first reaction is going to be to stand up and try and figure out what's going on. And this is often mistaken for, an aggressive sign, but really they're just trying to figure out what you are at this point. What you most commonly will see are bears that are relaxed and just being bears. The center picture of the sow with her cubs, she's just feeding there. The guy on the right is out clipping grass, and you got the little guy walking along the stream. And then you got the big boar up in the top left corner that's just wandering through somebody's backyard, just doing what bears do. What most folks don't want to run into is a defensive or an agitated bear. And these usually involve bears that are attracted to a food source or a sow with cubs. You can see the guy on the left here, he's sitting there getting into somebody's garbage can, which is, of course, one of our biggest problems as far as bears go in Alaska. Sow with cubs there in the middle. She's tucked those cubs back behind her. When bears get defensive, they get agitated, there's some signs you can look for. Clacking of jaws is a big one that most folks are familiar with, as well as huffing. See some salivating occur. The guy on the left there, that black bear, he's got his tongue out, he's salivating a little bit. The brown bear on his right, he's got his lip curled out, and he's doing the same thing. You might also see them stomp or urinate, and sometimes they'll take out their aggression on an object near them rather than trying to come at you, and that's letting you know that bear is really getting highly agitated at that point. Now, the thing you really don't want to run into, of course, is the aggressive bear. And these photos show more what an aggressive bear looks like. Their ears are back, their head's down, they're in a predatory stance, and they're typically going towards the object that their aggression is focused on. For black bears that you normally have over there, most of your aggressive bears are going to be your large boars. Every black bear incident we've had where people have been killed in Alaska has involved a large adult boar black bear. We're not talking sows with cubs. Those are basically defensive attacks that involves a large adult male. So the nice thing is that most bears actually just want to avoid us. They would rather know we're in the area and then do their best to go along being a bear without running into us. So that's the type of reaction that we want from a bear. Cautions that we suggest folks take in bear country. Number one is to mitigate attractants, and we'll talk more about attractants as we go along today, but that's basically anything that a bear finds of interest to smell, eat, that sort of thing. When you're out hiking, walking around in bear country, talking, whistling, some folks like to put bear bells on their kids. Those things all let bears know you're in the area, so they aren't surprised by you, and they can be that bear that just wanders off into the woods and doesn't actually interact with you, and that's probably best for both of you. We suggest folks carry a deterrent such as bear spray. Bear spray is highly effective. We haven't had any cases where the bear spray has been deployed and properly used and anyone's died in Alaska. So it's a really good tool to have out there. I can't say the same for firearms in all cases. They're good as long as you're properly trained on them, but oftentimes folks are a little too nervous and agitated to use a firearm as well as they should. One thing we do highly push for bears and folks living in bear country is electric fences. And again, we'll talk more about these as we go along, but they can be used to train a bear to stay away from an area very, very easily. Other deterrents you might know folks using include, pots and pans, banging them together. Chief Cushman over there, you might see him using cracker shells or rubber bullets to haze bears out of town. But the best deterrent as far as bears go is knowledge of bear behavior, where you're going to find them, what a typical reaction is for a bear, and how to avoid negative interactions with them. So I told you we'd get back to attractants. Garbage is our #1 attractant. No matter where we're at in the state, if we could control our garbage better, we would have a lot fewer incidents of bad interactions with bears. Chickens and livestock cause a fair bit of problems. Bird feeders, especially this time of year, are a problem. Folks who feed their pets outside and leave pet food out, that's a problem. Barbecue grills, freezers, and fish waste. And we'll touch a little bit more on each one of these attractants individually. So with garbage, the best thing we can do is to have bear-resistant trash containers if we're going to keep the trash outside. Or you can keep the trash inside until you actually take the trash down to the dump. In Seldovia there, you guys have the dump right there where you take your trash to. So if you're going to store your trash outside, it needs to be in a bear-resistant container. I'm not talking just like a little wooden box that your trash cans are kept in with a little plywood lid. That's not much to deter a bear from. It needs to be a commercially approved container or something that is very sturdy and well put together. A good solidly built shed with locking doors, that works and is appropriate. But again, that little wooden plywood box, not so great.
Jason, can I interrupt real quickly? We have quite a few people that are on participating, and I wanted to let them all know that I've made it so that they can talk if they have questions. But we did have discussion around these trash cans the other day, and Michael is on here, and I don't know if he has the information with him right now, but I know that there was discussion of giving a resource to people of where you can purchase and how much these bear-resistant trash cans are, what the source is for purchasing them. Do you have that information?
So at the end of the slideshow here, there's actually a couple lists of suppliers for bear-resistant trash cans and for electric fencing material. And so that will be available for folks.
Okay, and is it possible to also have you email this slide presentation for us to share?
Yeah, that no problem whatsoever.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And so the container on the right here is what you often see put in by cities in parks and stuff to keep bears out of trash cans. Basically, you just have a trash can that slides into this box, which is the front latch there, and then the top latch is for people to actually put their trash into the can. Pretty simple setup. Not too expensive when you look at the cost of dealing with bears in the long run. Chickens and livestock, the most important thing is proper fencing. You need to have fencing that will keep the livestock contained, and then you also need to have the component to keep the bears out, which is the electric fence. Say if this was just the wire and just the wood here, that's not much of a deterrent for a bear. It'll slow them down, and it'll take some time for them to get in, but if they want to, they don't have any problems ripping through that to get in and get at those chickens. Bird feeders, like I said, big problem this time of year. Folks really like to watch their birds. We ask folks to take them down between April 15th and October 31st. And that's basically the time frame that our bears are typically most active in the year. I mean, a bear can get up in the middle of winter and wander around, but that's occasionally happens. It's not a normal everyday behavior. As you can see, these folks tried to put up a bird feeder in a way that a bear couldn't get at it, and they weren't very successful. Bears will figure out a way to get at your feeder. They're highly motivated when it comes to birdseed. That's a high protein food source for them. Real easy for them to consume and digest. So that's why we ask folks to take them down. For people who still want to attract birds to their yards, what we suggest is actually the picture you see here in the bottom left of the screen is to put a bird bath out, because that will still bring birds in to use that water source, but doesn't work as an attractant for the bear. So bird baths, much better than bird feeders this time of year. Pet food, I started to touch on a little bit. A lot of folks like to use these automatic feeders, especially put them out on their decks if they've got a dog that they don't keep inside and with them all the time. That's a big no-no in bear country. Dog food is actually our #1 attractant used by bear baiters around the state. Bears love dog food more than dogs do. If you are going to feed your pet outside, you need to make sure you do it at specific times of day, that you clean up that food as soon as the dog or cat is done eating, and that you take the containers back inside. So even just the smell of that dog food in a dog food bowl will bring a bear around to at least investigate.
Can I ask another question regarding that? Not about the food specifically, but I read that bears are also attracted to dog waste because of the undigested food in the poop, I guess, or something like that. So dog waste is also something that should be picked up and cleaned up out of your yard and disposed of properly.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. Is dog waste can be an attractant as well, and it's definitely best to clean that up on a regular basis and get it out of the area. So thank you. That's a great point, Shannon. One thing folks don't think about too often is their barbecue grills. We suggest folks store them inside. We are realistic and know that most people store them on their decks. If you're going to do that, we ask that you clean the grease trap religiously after each use, clean the grate, and clean up any splatter that's on the grill. This helps with, one, not attracting a bear to your deck, which most people don't want the bear there, and two, will help limit damage to your barbecue grill as well. If you've got one of those expensive couple $100 grills, you really don't want a bear ripping it apart to try and get at that grease trap and get all the grease out of it. We do have 1 or 2 instances of this every year that occurs. I know Seldovia, this is one we've dealt with a fair bit over in your neck of the woods. Freezers on porches. Freezers on porches just don't work well in bear country. Even if it's a locked freezer, has straps around it, bears will get into it. We've had them rip the tops right off of freezers that were locked. You can see in this case, the homeowners decided to put up an electric fence. They didn't do a very good job of installing that, and we'll again talk on that a little bit further along. I don't even know if it was actually running. It looks like it was because the light's green in this case, but the bear obviously got over that and got right into the freezer and found what he wanted. So freezers, best to keep them indoors. Smokers and fish waste. This one usually becomes more of an issue when July rolls around. You know, it takes a while to smoke some fish. A lot of people like to leave their smokers unattended. We really ask that people not do this. There are some ways you can mitigate it if you want to be able to leave your smoker unattended, and that goes back to electric fencing we'll talk about. When you bring that fish home, some people will clean it where they caught it. Some people will bring it home to clean. If you have fish waste, you need to either freeze it right away if you're not going to take it to the dump, take it to the dump, or bury it at least 2 feet underground. That doesn't mean dig a 2-foot hole and then put the waste in it. It means make sure you have 2 feet of soil on top of that fish waste. That will help keep the bears from coming around and trying to find that fish waste. Also, you know, don't put this in your compost bin. That's where we often end up with problems. People put fish waste in their compost bins, and then we end up with bears digging in their compost, and that causes problems. The number one thing to remember is that a fed bear is a dead bear. That's kind of words we live by. Bears find a food resource and they're going to come back to that area to check it out. It doesn't matter if you've already cleaned up the attractant. Once that bear has found something and gotten a reward at a place, it will come back to it. Even if it's a year later, it'll come back. Bears have great memories. They live, as long as 35 years. Some of the bears, can really make the circuits and learn where to find food over time. So just keep in mind, if you do leave an attractant out, a bear gets into it, it's likely that bear is going to end up dead. We had one incident in Seldovia this last week where Chief Cushman had to put down a bear, and what we'd really like to do is be able to avoid that and not have to do that in the future. Any bear that he catches in the trap at this point, even if he's trapping it, he has the directive not to re-release that bear, because that bear will end up just coming back and causing a problem. And the directive is to destroy that animal. So there is no catch and release for getting bears out of town. So it's very important that folks deal with this attractant issue and that we aren't bringing bears back to the community. Just wanted to touch briefly on some backpacking containers. I know there's folks over there that like to get out in the backcountry. We got lots of different kinds these days. You got the hard plastic ones there on the left that were kind of the original canisters. You now have Kevlar bags, which are good certified resistant containers, as well as some of the newer plastic containers, and just things for folks to think about when they're going out backpacking. I had a friend who went out bear hunting, spent a couple nights out. Her and her partner didn't have their food in a bear-proof container and left camp to go try to find a bear, and came back to camp and they didn't have any food. So something to keep in mind. Bears will get into your equipment when you're out there in the woods.
Jason, can I ask another question, going back to the slide about and the content about the bears going back to the same place over and over again?
Yep.
So I've only lived here a short while as compared to everyone else that's on this call. But even in the short time I've been here, it's pretty clear that that particular neighborhood where that bear was put down and another bear was put down last year, something about that neighborhood is attracting the bears. And I know that there's livestock there. I know that there's gardens there. There's just a lot of different things. So my question is, as far as retraining or mitigating, how would you deal with trying to keep a bear out of that particular neighborhood? What can those people that live there do? Would you recommend they all be putting up electric fencing in addition to all the mitigation efforts that are don't feed dogs and so forth outside?
So the first thing they need to do is get rid of, all trash needs to be completely secured at all times. And then if there is livestock, which it sounds like in this case there is, they need to be putting up an electric fence. Bears learn very well, and if those fences are in place, even if that bear has come back there in the past, you put up an electric fence, it runs into it, gets shocked once, it will learn that that is not a food source anymore. And it will at that point know that that's not a place to come back to. So it is possible to retrain a bear in some circumstances, but it takes the whole community working at it. And unfortunately, it's not always possible. And then what ends up happening is we end up dealing with all of the bears that have been trained to find food in an area, basically destroying them, and then having a new generation of bears come on board and learn that there is no food there. And sometimes that's what has to be done. Yellowstone is a perfect example of that. Folks might remember the pictures of people feeding bears in Yellowstone National Park back in the 60s and bears at the dump there. they basically had to destroy a population of bears, wipe them out, and have them repopulate in order to not have bears in the park anymore that were used to that behavior. Does that cover your question, Shannon?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yep. So bears and planes don't mix very well. Bears and boats don't mix very well. Again, it kind of goes back to keeping bears out of things you don't want them on. Bears like to use these objects as play toys when they find them in novel places in the woods. Rubber rafts, they really like to jump on, chew on. Same goes for gasoline jugs, snow machines seats, four-wheeler seats. Anything that's made out of plastic, they tend to like to chew on. And that can be quite costly, of course, to the owners. So that leads us back to electric fences and what we can use them for. You can see here we've got pictures of fences around beehives. That you talk about an attractant for a bear. Beehive is about as good as it gets, and yet with this good fence setup around it, this fellow's never had a problem with bears, even though he has them right in the middle of bear country. So here's just all the different things I can think of that you might put an electric fence up around. We talked about smokers a little bit earlier. If you do want to be able to run your smoker and not be present, putting that electric fence up, putting the smoker inside that electric fence is one way to be able to do that. Fruit trees, we don't have so much of a problem around over here. I'm not aware of too many over in Seldovia. I know bees are becoming more common. I think the biggest problem you guys have over there is the chicken coops in town. That's the one I'm most familiar with. So how do electric fences work? It's basically electrified wires, multiple wires strung around. We suggest that these fences be at least 4 feet tall, preferably 5. We're looking for 7,000 volts of electricity going through those wires, or 0.7 joules. And we'll get into a little bit more on how to set these up in the next few slides. We do also have great resources on the Fish and Game website that cover electric fences. So if at some point you lose this presentation, you can always refer back to that, or you can call me here at the office and I can help get the information for you. So fences work by basically having electric current running through them and then the animal grounding itself out so that it actually receives that shock. You might think of a bird on a wire. Why can a bird sit on an electrical wire? It's because it's not grounded. As long as it only has positive current running through it, it's not grounded, no problem for that bird. So that bear has to be in contact with the ground to ground itself. For this type of setup, the hot wires, or a better setup is to have both positive and negative wires hooked up to your energizer. And that way, when a bear runs into 2 wires, no matter what, it's getting shocked. And if a bear is trying to go through an electric fence, it's always going to touch 2 wires. And so that's why I say a positive negative wire setup is better. And our next slide here gives a really good example of how to set one of these up. You can see our first positive wire starts at 8 inches off the ground. We suggest that be no more than 10 inches, and that's due to cubs. What you really don't want to do is end up with a cub on one side of the fence and a sow on the other, because in that case, if that cub can't get back through that fence and that sow gets agitated enough, that is the only time I know of an adult bear going through a fence. So definitely want to make sure these are set up properly. We have our solar panel here, which is recharging our battery, which is hooking to our energizer or our controller. And then the fence wires are grounded to that. Notice the grounding rod in this picture. That's a really important component to the fence, having it properly grounded. Otherwise, those negative wires aren't going to do you any good at all. And you have to ground a positive wire fence too, just like you would ground the electrical circuit on your house. Now, most of you over there are, have AC electrical to your house. So then you don't even need to do the solar or the battery setup. You can actually run just a regular 110 energizer. And we'll talk a little bit about energizers here. 3 types. We have our 110, our DC, and then our solar battery charger setup, which is here on the left and was in the last picture. You know, the most straightforward for most folks is going to be to run that 110, as long as you have electricity to your house. These are low impedance energizers. They have a pulse rate of 50 to 60 pulses per minute. That means the electricity isn't continuously flowing through the wire. It's giving you a pulse of electricity every second or so. DC ones work similarly. These are great for backpacking or going out in the field. You can run them on 12-volt batteries. You can get 6-volt systems. And we actually have ones now that run on just your D batteries or even your AA batteries. It just takes a few more of them to run the system, and they don't last as long. These systems can be a little bit more expensive than your AC system just because of the battery component. And they require a little bit more regular maintenance, which is again why I would suggest folks use that 110 AC energizer for systems as long as you have electricity to the area you're trying to put the fence up. Solar's a great option, especially if you have a battery setup, but you do have to remember that that panel has to be getting sun to recharge the system, and your panel needs to be large enough to recharge that battery and keep that system energized. Sometimes folks set this up and don't actually think about that, especially as we get later in the year. You know, you get around to late September, early October. These don't often work quite as well. So conductors or the wire that you set up around the fence, you know, typically folks are using aluminum or stainless steel for just that single strand of wire. Some folks might use the poly tape or the netting that you saw in some of the photos earlier. This slide gives you kind of the distances and the feet you need to cover an area, so it helps you calculate pretty easily what you need to purchase. And electric fence setups really aren't that expensive when you think about the cost of having livestock or replacing that livestock. You know, typical setup you can get for a couple $100 when by the time you buy the wire, you know, buy the energizer, set up the whole post. It may run you as much as $500, but if you got a lot of chickens or you got goats or something, that pays for itself in the long run. And depending on what you set up, it's permanent and pretty much will last forever. This polyethylene wire doesn't last as well as the actual wire itself. It does tend to break down and degrade over time. So for permanent setups, I don't suggest using it, but it's great as far as lightweight material goes. These are some suggestions for wire and wire gauges. The Maxi Shock is a great option here in Alaska because it has a zinc coating, which helps it last a lot longer in our conditions. The longer the distance you're trying to cover, the smaller gauge wire you want, which means the wire is actually thicker around. Think of it like you would a shotgun shell. So the bigger the gauge, the smaller the gauge, the bigger the wire actually is. Fence posts, you can use all sorts of different types of fence posts, metal, wood. You can buy these poly and fiberglass poles, which are a little more lightweight for your backcountry setups. You just need to make sure that you have good insulators between the wire and the post. And you can get insulators to make gate closures. You can see here a couple of different types with the plastic handle there. That's for you to grab onto and be able to make an opening that you can open and close easily so that you can get in and out of your enclosure. I mentioned grounding is very important. Most problems we see with electric fences are due to improper grounding. So having a good 4-foot long grounding rod our good copper rods are great. Usually you need the aluminum or metal head on that rod to get it into the ground very well. But you don't just want to use a tent stake to ground out your fence. You need to make sure you get a proper rod for it. You do need to test your fence once in a while when you set it up, and once a week usually is plenty for most folks. You can check it every other day if you got the time, but at least once a week. You can get a simple little tester. These aren't very expensive to buy. Most places that sell you energizers will sell you a tester too. So it's pretty easy to find. We get questions on electric fencing all the time. One of the most common is, are fences a fire hazard? The answer is simply no. The old fences were. The new fences, they aren't, and that's because they now use low amperage and have short pulses, which keeps them from being a fire hazard. Another one we often get is, are these safe for people and animals? And the answer is yes, it is. They are safe, and again, that goes back to the short pulse and the low amperage. Your kid can't walk up to the fence, grab a hold of it anymore, and sit there and just be shocked and not be able to release the fence, because that electricity is pulsing through. So they may get a shock and they may not like it, but it's not going to cause any permanent damage. And actually the pet or the person will learn pretty quickly to avoid electric fences. Another question we get is, if I'm using wood post, can I just wrap the wire around the wood post? The answer is no. And that's because when that wood post gets wet, especially in our environment, it's going to short out the system, and then your fence isn't going to work. So just some common things to keep in mind for electric fencing. We touched a little bit on deterrents, and so I'd like to talk a little bit about what works best for what type of bear you're dealing with in the situation, because these are questions that folks often have. For your average curious bear that's just wandering through your yard, making some noise, using an air horn, that works well. We've had folks who like to use flares. I am not highly supportive of flares, and that has to do with the fire hazard as much as anything. We've had folks use flares, throw them at bears. Bears pick up the flares, run off into the woods with them, start fires. So people often don't think about those issues when they're thinking about ways to deter a bear. A defensive bear, that sow with her cubs, or that bear that you startle in the woods. Bear spray is great. It only has an effective range, of 10 to 15 feet. So you do have to know how to use it, and you have to be able to keep your cool and have that bear spray in a place where you can actually reach it. Having that bear spray in your pack, on your back, that isn't going to do you a lot of good when you startle that bear in the bushes real close. You need to have it readily accessible, and that's the biggest problem we have with folks trying to use bear spray, is they put it on their pack in their back, and it's they can't actually get at it when they need it. Aggressive bears, that goes to bear spray and firearms. To an extent, you can deal with aggressive bears with bear spray, but if that bear is really intent on a food source, unfortunately, we're stuck with firearms at that point. But then again, you have to make sure you're using the proper caliber and you are well trained in the use of them. So firearms, I'm always cautious when I suggest firearms for use with bear sprays. We have more people injure themselves or injure each other dealing with firearms when it comes to bears than we do have bears attacking people. So again, cautionary note as far as firearms are going. Calibers we do suggest for firearms include a 44 Magnum handgun or larger, or a 12 gauge shotgun. We don't suggest smaller calibers just because they don't have the stopping power. Those are what we use as a department when we're dealing with bears. And so that's what we suggest to other folks as well. An example of why not to use smaller calibers and why to make sure that well-trained individuals are using firearms goes back to a case I dealt with where a kid decided to chase a bear off of a chicken coop with a .22. He wounded the bear, it crawled off in the woods, and then we had to go and track it down that night and put it down. And that's never a fun situation to have to deal with. Going into the brush after a wounded bear is not that much fun. Electric fences, they're good for all bears as long as they are set up properly. So again, that's the one that we'll push as far as really using around livestock and attractants that you can't just get rid of. We touched on firearms and calibers a little bit already here.
Jason, can I interrupt to ask a question too? Because I don't see it on here, and it's been talked about a lot with the programming that we do. We take kids out on hikes, and so we do not carry firearms because we're with children when we go out and about. And we do have bear spray. But my question is, it was told to me by someone that works with us, you know, that we need to make sure that we have a dog with us. And I've heard that some dogs bring a bear and some dogs chase a bear. And my own dogs have never had an encounter face to face with a bear. So I don't know how they're going to react and what kind of dog I have as far as chasing a bear or bringing a bear to me. So can you just speak to dogs in general as a bear deterrent?
Yeah, so I do not suggest dogs in general as a bear deterrent unless you are a trained dog handler and have a trained dog, just because of all the issues that you currently raised. A lot of times what happens is somebody has a dog, it's not on leash, it runs off to a bear, barks at it, the bear takes a swipe at it, the dog then runs back to the owner and the bear follows the dog. That is our most common reaction to bears and dogs and the problems that we see. A good, well-trained Karelian bear dog, they're great. They work well. We use them in our line of work all the time. But again, that's a trained professional with a well-trained dog. I've got a dog that I can keep off leash. She's seen lots of bears. She'll sit right beside me. She'll bark if I want her to, or I can make her not bark. But again, that's a well-trained dog that has spent a lot of time around bears. So as a general rule, I do not suggest dogs as a deterrent for bears. And when you're out hiking, if you're in bear country, if you're picking berries right next to where bears are, you are going to bring your dog. I highly suggest folks put that dog on a leash that keeps it really close to them.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yep.
While we're at a stopping point here for a second, I just wanted to point out we do have some people watching on Facebook Live, and we're monitoring for questions, and I'm monitoring the chat for questions as well, but I'm not seeing any questions from either group. And so I just want to throw out there that if anybody has questions, we can unmute you so that you can ask your questions, or if you're on Facebook, you can type in the comments. All right, go ahead, Jason. I'll let you know if I see any questions pop up.
Okay, well, I only have a few more slides, so if we don't have any questions, this is going to be a short lunch hour talk for you guys. So touching on laws and regulations as far as bears go, our biggest one we deal with is 5 AAC 92.230, and this is what we write folks a lot of citations under. It refers to negligently feeding or intentionally feeding wildlife, and you cannot negligently or intentionally feed moose, deer, elk, bear, wolves, coyotes, fox, wolverine, or deleterious exotic wildlife. So that would include things like pheasants, pigeons, anything that is not native and folks have turned out. Those are kind of the big ones we have over here. So if you leave an attractant out, even though you didn't mean to, and a bear comes around and we end up having to deal with that bear, we are going to write you a citation under this regulation. Um, there is a provision in our laws that you can take game in defense of life and property. However, there are some caveats to that. The first is that this taking cannot be necessitated by harassment or provocation of the animal or the animal space in an unreasonable behavior. And that's going to be determined by myself or the troopers as to whether or not your actions were reasonable. So keep this in mind if you decide that you need to DLP an animal. The next would be improper disposal of garbage or other type of attractants. So if somebody doesn't have secured garbage, or they have that bird feeder up and they shoot a bear in their yard and claim a DLP, we're going to be writing them a citation in that case because they have done an action or failed to take action to prevent that DLP from occurring. And then last, you have to exhaust all other means of dealing with the situation. So again, that goes back to making sure that you've mitigated all the factors that might bring that bear in to your property and cause the situation in the first place. So just to kind of wrap things up, steps that an individual can take to improve bear and human interactions. Number one is to remove and minimize all attractants. And the biggest one we deal with, of course, is garbage. The next one over in Soldovia is going to be livestock, and then all the other ones that we mentioned before. Talk to your neighbors. Get them to clean up their attractants. It doesn't do you any good to have your attractants cleaned up and to have the house, right next to yours that has all sorts of bear attractants into it. That bear is still going to walk right through your yard going to your neighbor's place and still going to come through the neighborhood. So this has to be a community effort. It can't be a single individual trying to make the situation better. Third, learn bear behavior. The more you know about these animals, the easier it is to be comfortable around them, and the better it is to have good interactions with them. And then be conscious when you're out there in bear country and try to practice good interactions with them. And some steps I would suggest for the city of Soldovia. I know some folks have been trying to work on some of this, but number one would be to institute a city ordinance concerning attractants. And I've got an example at the end of this slide for one that the city of Homer has. We've got others from Juneau, but they need to clearly outline what trash container requirements are. They need to require electric fencing around livestock, and they need to clearly outline what punitive actions will be taken for folks who do not follow the ordinance. And then number two, replace all public trash cans with bear resistant containers. I know Soldovia's got some trash cans they've had just in the city proper, and then as well as down in the city campground. In the past, I've asked that these get replaced. I think last year they were actually removed so that we didn't have as much of an issue with them. But then that causes the issue as far as folks leaving trash out and not having a place to put it. So that's why I say getting some bear resistant trash cans would be a much better step. And then in the campground, I suggest putting a bear proof storage bin. Kachemak State Park has worked with me on this, and they've put one at all of their major campsites throughout the park so that folks who don't bring a bear canister, don't remember to do that, don't think about it, they have a place to put their attractants when they are camping overnight. That's just something that can be very, very helpful. There are grant programs through agencies like Defenders of Wildlife to work with trash containers and storage containers for projects such as what the city of Soldovia would have. And then another one that I've suggested over and over is to electrify the city dump and maintain a good fence around it. We have bears every year that come into the dump there. They're shot by hunters. They're cause a problem as far as the employees at the dump. I get calls about that every year. So putting up a good electric fence, maintaining it, that would really help the situation over there. it would be beneficial and helpful to all of us, because those bears that are getting attracted to the dump are also the same bears that are moving down and in through town. So even if you cleaned up all of town, you still have the dump issue to deal with as well. And with that, I'll take any questions folks might have. I appreciate your time and taking it to listen to me and what suggestions I have to help folks over there. Like I said, there are a few additional slides I can scroll through for folks that have information on them as far as where to find containers and electric fencing options. So I'll do that here and see if anybody has any questions.
Thank you. I am just checking to see if there's any questions coming in on the live feed, and I don't see any there. I did have a question about the ordinance and the things that you are recommending for the city of Seldovia, and I'm wondering if that is something that you've been in discussions with the city manager and the city council about those recommendations?
So Chief Cushman and I talked about this last year. He brought it to the city council. It was, I believe, shot down by the city council last year. I have talked to the city manager about it in the past as well. And I'm not sure if it'll be brought up again. We had some citizens as well that were pushing for the putting some of these things in place. But you know, getting them in place is not something that I can force Seldovia to do. It's only something that I can suggest to help deal with these issues.
Right. So anybody that's participating on Zoom, is there anybody else that has any questions for Jason? And Jason, when you send me that email with the PowerPoint presentation, I will be posting it to Healthy Chatter, and this recording will be, the live version will be there on the Healthy Chatter Facebook group. So anybody that has any questions, if they want to look at any of these resources that you're posting, they can go there to see these resources and jot down numbers and so forth.
Great. Thank you, Shannon.
Yes.
So I guess as long as we've got time, I can share some of the more interesting incidents we've dealt with in recent years as far as attractants and bears. One of, depending on your point of view, more amusing cases was a black bear that found berries in the back of a fellow's car. The guy had left his windows down, and the bear climbed in and helped himself to all the berries in the back of the car and left a nice little mess for the guy. And then wandered off, and he left some berries, so the fellow decided he should take those and put them on the porch. It was a screened porch with a door, and so he did that. And the next night, the bear came back and opened the screen door. They're amazingly good at working handles, as long as they're the pull lever type. Helped himself to the rest of the berries on the porch, and left another nice little mess for the fellow, and walked off. So that poor guy with his, I don't know, must have been at least 10 gallons of blueberries, ended up with no berries, and nothing but a story to talk about. I didn't have a whole lot of suggestions for him, except to maybe not leave his berries in a place where the bear could get at it in the future. Another good one we had last year was a fellow. It was actually a woman who had some livestock, so she had some livestock feed that she had left in the back of her truck bed. And one night the bear found that in the back of the truck bed and got into it and ate one of the bags. And so she decided to she didn't have a building to put it in. She didn't want to put it in her house, so she decided to put it in the truck. Bear was fine with that. It went to the cab of the truck, ripped the door handles off of the truck, trying to get into the truck, In this case, it wasn't actually able to get the door open, but a lot of damage was done to a nice brand new vehicle, all because of a simple attractant and not putting stuff properly away. So just these little things to think about. You know, they happen every year. We get a new story every year, but these were two recent ones.
I also have a comment here from Michael Opine, and Michael just mentioned that Wagon Wheel also has electric fence supplies.
Yes, they do, and I thought I had that up on, yep, on our supplier list here.
Okay, all right.
So thank you, Michael. That's a great local, easy source to get electric fencing from.
Can I ask too, because I didn't see any cost on there, I always hear that bear-proof containers for trash are costly, but costly is kind of a vague term. What is a general guideline for like approximately how expensive just a bear-resistant trash can would be?
Thank you for using the word resistant. I haven't found anything that's truly bear-proof.
Oh, Michael just posted $279 for the ones Ulmer's had. Is that?
That seems on the high end, but I hadn't checked recently. I don't give pricing just because it seems to change so much. I think up in Kenai at Home Depot, they were a fair bit cheaper than that last time I priced them out. They were under $200, but that's been a few years.
Michael says that that price was a few weeks ago that he saw it at Ulmer's. So yeah, and I understand that those prices fluctuate and supply and demand and all of those things. I was just curious how expensive was. And I do think that, you know, like you mentioned, the city has things that has the recommendations, and certainly they can do what they want to do with it. I think personal responsibility, when we look at COVID, there's like the mandates and now advisories, and we've shifted from the government telling us what to do to personal responsibility. And I think that's possibly why the city is just, you know, backing off a little bit, is letting people have that personal responsibility. But I understand some of the recommendations have to do with city properties as far as the dump and the trash cans around the community that are placed by the city and maintained by the city. So I think it'd be great to eventually get to that place, and maybe they can do it in phases because of cost.
Yeah. And I guess one thing to note on the dump, Shannon,
the dump is borough owned.
Yeah, the dump is borough owned, exactly.
Okay.
And they actually contract that out to a contractor. And so it's the contractor that I've approached on that issue in the past, because that is not actually a city dump. But you know, if the city pushes the borough on the issue, and then the borough puts it in the contractor's contract, then that's a way to get that established. So. Yep.
Okay, well, we're coming up on 1 o'clock, and I'm not seeing any other comments or questions on Facebook or from any of the attendees that are here with us on Zoom. So I would just like to say thank you very much, and I really appreciate the information, and I'm sure everyone watching as well. And so, like I said, this will be available for you to watch back if you want to watch anything back, and if you want to use this as a reference for other people to watch it. This was a great presentation for all of us, and certainly we're hoping to keep everyone safe this summer and every summer when the bears come to town.
Well, thank you all for your attention. And if anybody ever wants to get a hold of me, has questions, please call the Homer office. My direct line over here is 235-1725. Happy to answer any questions you have, take any comments. We're here to serve you. So please be in touch if you need something.
Thank you very much, Jason, and we'll be in touch, and I'll get that PowerPoint posted as soon as I've got it ready to go. Thank you guys so much for attending today, and thank you, Jason, for joining us on Zoom today.
Thank you, Jason.